and push ourselves beyond our own conservation sector business as usual thinking. And this is particularly true in light of the financing challenges and income challenges that we see across TFCAs with a range of different stakeholders. We know that the financing gap is something that we have dealt with historically throughout the years of TFCAs, and even more so now under the challenging circumstances of COVID-19. And we're well aware of the difficulties being faced by so many. But we're hoping to stir up some hope today and some innovative thinking and to deep dive into financing for TFCAs. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. We have Niels Meyer from KfW. Niels has 24 years of experience with KfW, the German Development Bank, and his mandate, amongst others, is to execute bilateral finance cooperation for the German government. And since 2014, he's been in charge of the Biodiversity and TFCA program with SADC. Prior to that, he worked mainly with NGOs in a number of different countries and has a background in agricultural economics and land resource management. Then we have Tebogo Matlahari from the European Commission. Tebogo has worked for over a decade with the EU delegation in Gaborone in Botswana, and his mandate focused on civil society relations and bilateral cooperation with Botswana government, and then building capacity for local NGOs. And since 2017, his mandate has a regional focus on natural resources and cooperation with the SADC Secretariat, including climate change, disaster risk management, agriculture, food and nutrition, and wildlife. Then we have Ellison Wright from the World Bank. Ellison is a senior natural resources management specialist at the World Bank, and since 2015 has worked on the strategic design and implementation of the Global Environment Facility funded Global Wildlife Program. And there are a lot of acronyms in there. The GEF-funded GWP is the largest global program focused on combating illegal wildlife trade. And Ellison provides cross-sector support between a number of different programs, as well as leading on the innovative Wildlife Conservation Bond GEF non-grant instrument project, and has extensive experience in the private sector, in environmental sustainability, climate change, and infrastructure programs. He's also authored and co-authored various publications. Our final panelist is Doreen Robinson from UNEP. Doreen is the UNEP Global Chief of Wildlife, and she's worked for several government and non-government organizations, including the US Peace Corps as well as USAID. While with USAID in Madagascar, she supported rural communities exploring sustainable solutions. And in South Africa, she led the regional environment, energy, and climate change programs across 14 SADC countries. So as you can hear, a serious wealth of insight and experience. I'm going to hand over to our first panelist for the session. I just want to check with Clara if Doreen has been able to join us. Yes, I see that Doreen is online. Doreen, if I can hand over for you for your insights, please.
Sure, and I apologize, I don't have my video on because of connectivity issues. But yeah, my first thought, I am also leading UNEP's COVID response for making sure that environment is building back better. And in terms of funding and providing new resources for TFCAs, I think this COVID situation offers a particular opportunity for the conservation community to rethink how we pitch TFCAs and what they can offer. In our pre-discussion, we had said we don't even know if there'll be a post-COVID world. It'll be a new, living with COVID world. And so some of the areas for financing that we're talking about with many of the other multilaterals and other panelists might be able to speak about this are new concepts of debt relief and different ways of bringing in the private sector to build more resilient rural economies that are more connected at a sub-regional level to deal with some of global value change value chain changes. So I do think that a rethinking and a reframing of TFCAs a bit to reach out to these other non-traditional financial partners in this context that we're living in is going to be absolutely essential and necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doreen. Niels, if I can hand over to you for your insights, please.
Yes, thanks, Candice. Clara, good afternoon, everyone. I can't see you all, but I'm really excited about this webinar. Yeah, just to keep it short and to prepare the discussion, I think we can stir hope because we get lots of fundings. For us as a donor, it's rather the challenge to get the right projects and to deliver. So we get funds right now for COVID-19 responses to CASA, to GLTP, to Malawi, Zambia. We could even do more on the training side or TFCA facility if it was easier. We are going to talk about that. So I think there is enough hope and enough resources available so that we should not only focus on a question of a funding gap, but in my view, there's also a sort of solution and impact gap that we need to discuss. So yeah, donor and projects, I think it's demand supply, we have to deliver. And there are, of course, lots of issues. We've been active on the TFCAs for the past 20 years, large scale, very complex ones, I admit. We've done a lot of progress. There's no doubt about it. There's a good story to tell and there's great excitement overall. We are setting up new projects and mechanisms. That's not an issue, but to be very frank and open in this discussion, implementation and spending is not really exactly as we want it to be. So I think it would be really nice if we can, not only talk about fund mobilization, but also about budget allocation and distribution. Are we really reaching out? Are we getting holistic? Are we really reaching the communities and the priorities? Or what type of bottlenecks, biases, skews, interests do we have? So yeah, I think that's probably enough for a discussion and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niels. And I think Niels raises an important question there, that it's not just about financing or sourcing specific funds, but it's also about resource efficiency and resource allocation. What are we using our existing resources for in terms of the needs on the ground, in terms of administration, efficiency, etc. So that's a good point to bear in mind for the discussion. And just a reminder to everybody, please feel free to post questions in the chat or specific concerns that you'd like to share as we facilitate the discussion. I'm going to hand over now to Borgo. Thank you.
Thank you, Candice. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us. Good afternoon from Gaborone. Happy to see you all, your names and your faces, one or two familiar ones. Hi, Data. Yes, colleagues, the starting point is here. I mean, our work, our interest in transfrontier conservation areas is about protecting biodiversity and developing the environmental assets and capital that are there for the survival of the human rights of life itself. But now let's look at the fact that this COVID-19 crisis has come up and it has jolted us into a stand-up position. It's a strong reminder that the unsustainable use of wildlife and destruction of our ecosystems and unsustainable use of land resources, either through farming, through other developments, are just not good for biodiversity. These are the major drivers for example, the emergence of all sorts of diseases, including zoonotic ones, as the veterinarians would say. And from the EU perspective, the EU has put in place an ambitious plan. We call it the EU biodiversity strategy, which intends to bend the curve of biodiversity loss by addressing all the key drivers and protect biodiversity, as I said, and to support strengthening of ecosystems. And as we are going into a new, funding plan from 2021 to 2027, the EU Green Deal is our compass here. That's what we are looking at, and biodiversity comes up very, very strongly there. And I am looking forward to being able to speak a little bit more about various aspects of this as we proceed. So, yeah, so far I'll stop here. Over to you, Candice.
Thanks to Bocchino, and we look forward to hearing more about how biodiversity features in the EU's new Green Deal. Ellison, if you would like to share your preliminary insights with us, please.
Thank you, Candice. And first, let me congratulate your team and the TFCA Secretariat there for organizing this wonderful set of workshops there. Normally we will all be together, and it's great to see and be with everybody, and we missed that. I'm calling here from the US today, but you know, one of the good things about this COVID, there are many bad things, obviously. And I include my kids teaching online as part of those bad. But the good online connection here is that, you know, we're able to get different colleagues from Germany, from the US, and so on to participate. And all of these recordings here are really going to be a wealth of knowledge. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for organizing. But as far as, you know, where we are, I think today, despite the tremendous suffering and the economic and the health issues that we're going through, you know, there will be a lot of good opportunities that come, you know, because if you see the amount of money that's available out there, and Niels, he correctly said that the money that's already there needs to be spent better and have more results. And that's true across the board, and not just in this sector. This sector is probably one of the more challenging ones, right? Look at, you know, climate change, look at other areas. They've developed a bit more, some of the funding programs, some of the project schemes, and how to get the activities going. In biodiversity, I think we still need to improve a bit more, and certainly on the wildlife space, we can do, you know, some more efforts there. So, but the good thing is that there is a lot of money. Okay, the hard thing is, how do you channel that money to bankable projects, as has already been said? And I think that is something that we'll need to continue to work on. And, you know, the example that I see here looking out my window, every time there's an economic crisis, they repave the driveway and the, you know, walkway in front of the house. And that's just a project that they do every, you know, 7 to 12 years whenever there's an economic crisis. But there's so much that can be done, and especially with that green lens of how do you get into multiple benefit streams to make it happen. And I think the huge opportunities across the TFCAs is these are such vast areas that can provide multiple benefits, right? We talk a lot about the biodiversity and the wildlife benefits, but there's a carbon story, there's, you know, the livelihoods piece. And I know for the World Bank, again, many people think, oh, why is the World Bank even talking about biodiversity conservation or whatever the environmental cause is? Because the mandate is for poverty reduction and shared prosperity. But, you know, as we all know, unless you protect those natural assets that the poorest of the poor rely on, you're not going to be able to reach them. So it can be a very strong anchor. So, you know, we're looking to, you know, support certainly through, you know, grants, through loans, through different, you know, typical financial mechanisms here, country by country, and on a few cases, kind of a regional approach. And we're also, with the help of the GEF and all of the funding that they provide, doing a bit on this global wildlife program, the country by country support with all of the different partners that we have, UNDP, UNEP, many others that, you know, are engaged with that country program. And more recently, we started to support 2 South African agencies there, looking at channeling working with our treasury colleagues here, funding from institutional investors, so that we would use the World Bank's AAA rated balance sheet to issue a bond, and then that money from the coupons that would be foregone would go to support conservation efforts. So if, and this builds on excellent work that ZSL, UNDP, and many others had done over the last 5 years or so, to try to really get to a, call it, financial market solution, a debt instrument that the bank would issue to try to channel some money to conservation. So again, there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot that can be done, and I think we do need to look beyond just the typical mechanism, typical activities, and having a consistent story that can be, shared to really highlight all of the wealth that is available. Most of it is not market, market quantified, right? It's not something that the financial colleagues and the treasury colleagues can look at and say, okay, this is $1 million or $10 million, because these ecosystem services, these are generally things that are beginning to be considered now. But we need to really quantify that and have that be part of our standard quantification language and assessments of how things get done. And I think that would really, channel a lot more money once that's really broadly adopted. So again, thank you. And we're excited to be there. Sorry, we're not there in person, but hopefully soon.
Thank you very much, Ellison, and some really good comments there, particularly around the co-benefits that exist with TFCAs, and that these are really cross-disciplinary, cross-sectoral. And we need to begin to showcase those to be channeling the funds and the finance that is available. And it's not so much about lack of finance, but more about channeling it in the right direction. So we have some comments and questions that are coming in, but before we move to them, there's some key questions that I'd like to pose to our panelists. And the first really speaks to some of the comments that Niels raised earlier, around how we can utilize resources in the most efficient way possible. And perhaps, Niels, you can provide a few more insights in how the various TFCA facilities can be used to foster that coordinated approach to channeling finance and funds to get more impact at scale. So, for example, how do we reduce transaction and admin costs? How do we ensure that efficiency? Perhaps there are 3 primary points that you could point in that direction with regards to the implementation of existing finance. And of course, our other panelists are also welcome to jump in on each question if there's something you'd like to add.
Yeah, thank you, Candice. Yes, so I think all of us, we have had the presentation on Tuesday from Chigodo, from IUCN on the TFCA financing facility. So that is one new development that we've been supporting in a great collaboration with so many partners, SADC Secretariat, member states, IUCN. I can't name them all because I want to answer to your question. And we hope, it's a dream, it has to start, it has to take off, but we really hope that this will create a great platform and really forum for lots of developers to join and to support. Because what I observe in the field for the past 6 years, that all of our colleagues, and usually the most qualified, the best people are just busy writing proposals and getting funds and doing fundraising, sometimes for 50,000, 200,000, 500,000, a million or something. Some of those materialize, others not, but there's a huge transaction cost involved currently in projects and project management and fundraising, which is really disturbing the whole system. And so I think, although there is a good justification for specific funds for wildlife trade and anti-poaching things, and some of them are abroad and others are kind of more decentralized, we have to become better in that way and really join forces and pool resources in order to avoid this type of really application, fundraising, small projects, and then there's no extension, then they are looking for other sources to get funded. Most of the parks, NGOs and departments that are busy developing a park, they rely on, say, 10 to 15 various donors and funds and philanthropists and ministries, etc., etc. And this is, we can't change it overnight, that's clear. There will be a variety and diversity, but this is at least one dimension of our sector financing that definitely needs to improve. So we are hoping that these call for proposals under the TFCA financing facility will be attractive for other donors to join in, whether they add to the fund, like we've seen with the Blue Action Fund, where we started basically just with German funding. Now we have the French, we have the Swedish, we have some UN funding. So over years, people join. With other mechanisms, we are going to have it. I think World Bank, UN, US, they have similar experiences that we can build on. So this would be just ideal. EU has done a lot, and really we wanted to partner much earlier, but it took us a while to go through all the SADC structures and mechanisms to get the approval and formal endorsement. But I think now that we are ready to go and we have all these endorsements, yeah, any donor is really invited to join and to partner. Thanks.
Thank you, Niels. From our other panelists, are there any comments on that? Doreen, I can see your microphone is unmuted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm gonna try and sort out this video thing, but a couple of thoughts on that too, because I know your question was also about efficiency and impact questions, and I do think it is linked to my primary comment of how do we tap into these other resources that are out there. Part of it is how we are able to tell the story of TFCAs and what they're able to achieve. And telling that story, I know, Ellison, you said it was very hard. I think our sector is particularly hard because the nature of ecology and species are lag times to get to results. But I think as a community, we can get a bit more savvy about the kind of, again, the co-benefits and the contributions that TFCAs are able to make, and being able to tell that story effectively and be able to show that impact in the language that different kinds of donors expect to see and resonates with them, opens up new windows of opportunity. I think the other point, I think, going forward in terms of attracting these different funds, I don't want to say over and over TFCAs have to frame themselves differently because they just have to, but yesterday I was on a call with all the heads of UN agencies as well as all the major Nordic donor states and talking about, what are the priorities globally for getting, building back better and recovering from COVID and turning economies back on. And it was fascinating to me that, and then we had the member states, the discourse was about jobs, 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 right? And I remember, I must have heard that phrase 15 times. And so that is what folks are thinking about. So again, there is resource out there, and there is I heard the highest level of commitment from every head of agency at UN, as well as 5 or 6 Nordic states, saying they want to use this as an opportunity to reinvest their finances in a greener recovery, and the focus was particularly on Africa. But they're looking at how these different investments are going to generate jobs. So I think that's something I don't think I've heard a whole lot about in terms, and it does take us down a pathway of thinking about ethical and safe commercialization of certain wildlife value chains. And I think these are all areas that we also have to explore, because I came from a really big donor before, but even as one of the largest bilateral donors in the world, I still don't think it is enough to meet the mission that we're all trying to achieve globally or even within Southern Africa. So I do think we need to rethink these things. Thanks.
Thanks, Doreen. I think that's really insightful, that there are countries and funders and donors and investors in the private sector that are looking and want to have a green recovery, that there is an ideal to build back better. And the fact that we're starting to have that conversation is one of the opportunities that's come out of a very disastrous crisis. So how do TFCAs begin to position those co-benefits, put that different lens on, and collectively start to promote that different lens and all those different co-benefits that come into it, to be able to access those funds and to show what those co-benefits are to the various financing sources. And I think this leads us quite well into a more detailed question to Tebogo on the EU's Green Deal, and how the EU are thinking about their COVID-19 response.
Hi, Candice and friends, colleagues. Again, I mean, with the COVID response, the EU has already, moved very fast, mobilized resources, and if you come, I mean, you can go at the level of a project where some flexibility has been allowed to say. You are allowed to reprogram your project. Okay, reprogramming it could mean something else somewhere else, but it basically means you could modify your project to redirect your efforts to supporting COVID-19 response in your environment. So we've already done that with a couple of projects, at least at the regional level, even here in Botswana for some of the civil society organizations. At the project level, like again, I say that applicants or beneficiaries were allowed to redirect some of the funding within the existing project to respond to support the national response or community responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. But of course, even going forward now, that was the response. Going forward now within the new programming, there's the EU recovery strategies. I mean, there are plans that way the focus is on what we call building back better. This is where we're saying, as we go forward, we have experienced this very dangerous pandemic. This crisis has come upon us. I mean, it's a crisis, of course, so it also applies to everybody. But then we have an opportunity now, because at least for the EU, we are in between, we are at the end of one financial cycle. We're entering another. So we have an opportunity to bring the experiences of COVID-19 into our plans. We then go into our programming with the questions that say, how do we strengthen our resilience to future experience? How do you make your projects more green? How do you make your support to trans-frontier conservation efforts more sustainable? How do you make it more beneficial? How do you assist the beneficiaries, the communities that are being supported by the life in those geographical areas, better for them to withstand the impact of future pandemic. So what this means is therefore that through, for example, you can talk about the circular economy strategy. Even that, the questioning is the same. How do you make it more? How do you make it more resilient? How do you make our economies more green? Because from a Green Deal perspective, the EU saying, listen, by 2050 we want to be the first ones to talk about a carbon neutral economy. And we also, in terms of external elements of the Green Deal, want to take the lead in the lead globally for everybody else, for all other sectors, all other economies, to follow suit in terms of the way they plan. So that will be that will be followed through by the circular economy strategy. That will also be followed by the biodiversity strategy, which is much more relevant to us now. I mean, the EU already now is supporting more than 100 protected areas right here in Africa and elsewhere. And some of the ambitious plans is to say that, okay, at least in Europe, we say at least 30% of the land mass should be covered by protected areas. And that is not a small feat. So if you say that and you are in the lead, you are taking the lead in saying that, you're also committing yourself to supporting your partner institutions and your partner member states and countries to express and put into plans similar plans. So you get a sense here that support for development of TFCAs and strengthening of TFCAs going forward is going to be there. Like Neil was said just now, it's not about that there is no resources. It's about where is the will. Where are our priorities? Are we around the globe ready to prioritize a good life for our planet? Are we ready to prioritize a planet that is healthy, a planet that can sustain our lives going forward? Because as we have already been told that, listen, half of the global GDP depends on nature. That means ecosystems have to be healthy, ecosystems have to be strong to be able to support our economy, to be able to support our health, to be able to support our life in general. So these are the considerations of the external elements of the Green Deal. Green Deal is an EU Green Deal, yes, it will work in EU, but then its external elements, such as like I'm saying, the Global Biodiversity Strategy 2050, will also be supported from the Green Deal to make sure, because to make sure that all these are successful. There's no point in saying, okay, the EU will do this and we will succeed, and then everybody else around the world does not succeed. There's no point, because then we all depend on the same resources anyway. Resources can move around, yeah. So I mean, in brief, that's what I can say. I mean, I can respond to more questions as they come up. We are just starting. There's a lot of things that are yet to get into tune, and that information will be shared as we go. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Tebogo. We look forward to watching that information coming forward on the biodiversity strategy that's being funneled through the EU Green Deal. We have an interesting comment in the chat box from Doreen, and her question says, how do TFCAs fit within debt relief discussions that are underway? For example, Botswana has experience with debt for nature swaps. Can this experience be leveraged, and how does it have regional dimensions? And Ellison, maybe you can share some insights with us just from an innovative finance point of view around debt markets and opportunities for debt instruments and debt finance, and how we can pull that more into the TFCA landscape.
Hi, Candice. Sure. And great that we can see Doreen now, and she's talking and posing questions and answering them on the chat as well. So when I grow up, I want to be like Doreen and walk in the beautiful area there. But anyhow, let me just say two things before I jump into that question there, if you don't mind, Candice. One is, in the US, they had the Civilian Conservation Corps that really kind of helped to build out the parks, okay? The national park system is in different state parks all over the country here in the US. And that's really been the backbone of what all of the national parks here are. And the US National Park Service, they appropriate from Congress $3 billion, but what they generate to the economy, it's about $36 billion, okay, to the GDP. So it's a huge leverage potential that they have, okay, and that's small amount of money and really maximizing the financing for that particular effort in a much larger scale. Okay, and these are the hotels and all of the multiplier effects that are there. The other point is, you know, if we look at kind of some of those co-benefits, you know, again, there are private businesses, okay, even big oil companies, okay, that they're saying they're going to be carbon neutral within, you know, a decade or within a couple of decades, whatever that is. And they are willing to, you know, buy some carbon credits and be active in these other markets, which again, that wasn't the case the last 10 years. Things had really dropped off. But it looks like those companies that survived, they're having a good opportunity. So, you know, where you can have for-profit enterprises come in and help to use their, you know, supply chains, their accountability, their bonus structures and everything else, that you pay people to, you know, actually use their solutions, use their products. And again, you got to link it back to conservation, right? So where people are chopping down timber and using the firewood there for cooking, etc. If you introduce efficient stoves, okay, that are sold, I mean, they can be provided for free, but again, people get paid for having that in the market. And it's all linked back to the carbon finance and bigger corporations that do have the funding for this, okay? This is small amount of funding for a lot of these big corporations that have major carbon kind of caps and, you know, requirements from their shareholders to say, we need you to, you know, do something about this with your operations. So trying to green a little bit their operation and business model. So again, just to highlight that there are some opportunities there. On the debt question, certainly nature for debt swaps are wonderful, okay? And I wish there could be some. I think if you ask anybody that's trying to get funding, right? You know, a big question is, well, we already have too much debt that we're trying to service, so we don't want to take on more debt. Okay, that's actually, you know, perhaps too much for us. Okay, that impacts the credit rating, impacts a lot of other things related to country. And again, these are country level obligations, okay, in many cases. So it's not like, you know, SADC TFCAs are, you know, issuing debt on behalf of, you know, the TFCA overall. At least as far as I'm aware, I haven't seen that, which again, it may be interesting, but again, who's going to pay that? Who's going to be liable for that payment if something happened? So, you know, again, I think as has been said in the past, there's a lot of project work that some of those funds are being shifted towards, you know, the COVID response, and they're drawing down on some emergency contingency components of those projects. In other cases, very quick disbursement of emergency funds are going out there. And I know that the World Bank has said, you know, up to 160 billion is available. And a lot of the countries that the bank supports have already, you know, drawn down on that funding to help with their response. But again, if it's you know, IBRD country, okay, they actually borrow the money, right? And you have to pay it back at some point. So, you know, again, that's all part of that condition. So what's happened in the marketplace is that, at least, you know, in the US and most other countries, they've really reduced their interest rates significantly, okay? So if you look at the US interest rates over the last 3 years, it's dropped just tremendously, to the point where now it's very good for a lot of companies that can access capital markets and draw down their debt vehicles to use that money to keep paying their employees, to keep their operations alive, just so that they can come through once there's a vaccine or whatever the solution is going to be. So right now, you know, is really a bad time to try to do any transaction that's US based, okay, or US interest denominated, because what you're going to get for that money is very little. Okay, so just like your savings in the bank now in the US, you get a couple pennies for over a long period of time. Whereas if you issue it in South Africa or in Brazil or Turkey or elsewhere, where the interest rates are a lot more attractive, you need a lot less money in principle to loan, issue to the market to get some coupon payment. So I think, again, just to highlight that, yes, debt for nature, it's something that we should try to promote and grow as much as we can. You need the commitment, okay, from all of the folks who own that debt, because ultimately they're waiting to get paid, right? So somebody's going to have to pay this money one way or another, unless you can write it off. And that's what the loan officers and everybody is concerned about as well. We want to get paid back. How does that work, et cetera? So as far as, debt instruments, I think that's one of the categories that you can consider. On the other hand, there are many other ones too. Okay, so bonds, yes, impact investments and impact bonds, they're very important. I think they have a role. We're testing it for conservation. So there's really, you need to have a market, you need to be able to monitor what's going to happen, you need to show the results. So I think that's kind of a pilot, but it's great that the SADC region is having this first one, which again, thanks to the JEF non-grant instrument, I think we're quite close to actually pushing that out to the market. But, as far as, additional innovation, you need it at a scale, right? Because look at any of the financial markets out there. It's billions and trillions of dollars that we're talking about. And here, many of the projects that we have looked at and we're considering on the financial transaction side, they're small, $1 million, $5 million, right? And that's very little for doing anything in a TFCA that is the size of multiple countries, very large countries that you can actually do activities in. So I think that the last comment here is financial innovation, okay, is essential to tap into investments that are out there and money that we can tap into. Whether those may be guarantees, okay, debt instruments, I think you can probably get into the equity space as well. Equity, everybody's talking about markets here in the US reaching record levels, and it's insane. But at some point, the whole discussion around the environmental, social, and governance space, okay, that's going to tip over, and people are going to say, what is this buying us, right? Where our money, you put $1 here, and now it's worth $1,000, right? But, what is it doing for society, for the environment? And then in the US, the one thing that, people are concerned about, especially in the lockdown, is mental health, okay? And mental health and the well-being of families and so on. Nature, the connectivity with, animals and just be able to breathe clean air, that's so essential. And that's something that, other parts of the world have in abundance. And even here in the US, you have it. But at some point, whoever can create experiences, marketable products, and the connectivity to things beyond just the internet, mobile devices, whatever it may be, I think that will be a market that will grow tremendously. And how the actual protected areas, the communities around there benefit, that's something for us to see. And I think the last comment is, if you look at virtual reality, right, that is here, and artificial intelligence and all that, that is here, and it's just going to grow. So to the extent that, the TFCAs and the protected areas in those communities can build experiences and capitalize on that and get paid for it, right? That may be a future channel where, it's not just the company that makes the app or the device or flies over with the nice pictures, but you have to have a financial and international agreement probably that helps to direct those funds there. So sorry for the long response, Candice, but, hopefully we talked a bit about something that you wanted to get it to.
Thanks, Ellison. I think there was a lot in there. And I think when it comes to innovative financing models, you hit on a number of things that need to be in place. There isn't a silver bullet. There isn't a one size fits all. There are a number of different building blocks, whether you're looking at debt instruments or you're looking at technological innovations and how to access those. We need to be able to tailor make those opportunities for the individual context that we're looking at. I see that Harry has raised a hand during your discussion. Harry, do you have a specific question on some of the points that Ellison raised? You're welcome to unmute yourself and phrase your question, please.
Thank you, Candice. It's more about a point that was raised earlier by Niels regarding the implementation, as well as looking at broader co-benefits. So I don't know if you want me to raise it now, or do you first want to continue with the discussion that was going on?
Harry, you're welcome to ask that question specifically because there have been a lot of comments in the chat that also speak to TFCA coordination, the lenses around shared benefits, etc. So I think it's part and parcel of the ongoing discussion. So you're welcome to phrase your question now.
Okay, thank you. So if you look at lots of projects, what my experience is, or even large programs, it's very often an afterthought to look into what the benefits have been for communities or for other parties. And what the consequence is that often, let's say, a report is due, what is necessary is quickly collect some data, and it's almost an afterthought to think about these other benefits. If that is continuing, it will be very difficult to market products and programs and projects to donors. So the question that I have is, in what sense, and I think there has already been a module about monitoring, and I think I missed that one. But the question is, like, how much are programs and projects able to really set up their monitoring in a proper way from the beginning, and not only the conservation benefits, but also the livelihood benefits and other type of benefits. And what it makes me think of is what happens at a certain time when USAID was funding the LIFE program in Namibia, living in a finite environment, that they really started documenting what kind of benefits were being brought to these or generated by the communities that were involved in the program. And I think it is critical that we just really make sure that in the monitoring and evaluation, we have a broad sense of what needs to be monitored, that we collect the right data and have that available to make the right pitch for that these programs are way beyond just conservation and have it in an integrated approach. But it's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Are there any responses from our panelists?
Yeah, go ahead, Niels. Go ahead.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. I also read in the chat and all these comments, and I think one that I wanted really to go back to, because that is linking everything, is this issue about the institutions and the framework that we are in. And also the partners. There's something said about the governments, the NGOs, the communities, etc., etc. And I think this is obviously very, very, very important. And I'm sure this has been already discussed in other webinars, but I think it's just the nature of our TFCAs and our discussions that we are looking from various angles and perspectives, but coming to the same main underlying points. So if you allow, I would just like to highlight that, because just taking one example, CASA is one of the big TFCAs, 5 countries, huge area, like you rightly said. So we need so much institutional capacity at so many levels, local level, national level, cross-border, between 2 countries, between the 5 countries, working groups, committees, etc., public sector, private sector, NGOs, so many players in the field. And this is, yeah, it's ongoing. Some things have been developed and gone well, but we still have a lot of gaps. Also, this cross-sectoral coordination that is required. It's not just conservation. It's TFCAs are a lot more. It's about economic development. We are dealing in a landscape where there is agriculture, livestock development, there's industrial development. Around parks, we can have hydropower projects and mining and other issues. So it's definitely a lot more. And I think that's also the great potential of the TFCAs. We have these upstream, downstream issues. If you talk about the water coming from Angola, but the benefits being to a large extent taken in Namibia and in Botswana, whether it's for tourism or other areas. So we got all of these issues, and I don't want to bore you with that, but I think that is part of the story that I wanted to sell, is that yes, the TFCAs offer a great potential. We have scale, we have scope, we could convene a lot of things, but we still have to develop a lot really to get it. We are not yet there. And to a large extent, I think even in this call, it is still quite a small group, quite confined, a lot the wildlife and conservation area. And even between conservation and tourism, it's sometimes very difficult to talk to each other and to agree on things. And even more so when we talk now then about communities and other stories. So my plea was a little bit to say, yes, of course, financing is important, innovation is very important, scaling up is important, pooling is important, but we should also be very clear, modest, and also self-critical to the extent, have we delivered? Is the impact and the monitoring, the data that we see from the TFCAs, is that because of us, our interventions, our advice, or is it still the resource that is out there, still the people doing it, but our impact may not be as huge and significant as we want it. So I think that would be my really plea to the community and probably to some of the questions. If you have ideas what we can change and do better, really to make more impact in the TFCA, that is really what I'm interested in. Thank you, Candice.
Great, thanks very much, Niels. So unfortunately, we are ending our hour. I think we could discuss this in a lot more detail and unpack all these different elements, but unfortunately, we've only had an hour. But I think critically, there are two main components that have come up, and the one is around utilizing existing resources in the most efficient way, and what Niels was saying in terms of, are we using the TFCA facilities accurately? Is there sufficient monitoring and evaluation? What is the real bang for your buck impact on the ground? And then the other side of that is Ellison's comment, and to speak to Borjo and Doreen pointing out that there are resources, but it's about framing and packaging that in terms of the co-benefits, and looking at a more integrated approach that pulls all those different elements together. And so I'm going to hand over to our panelists just for a final comment from each of you. If you would just like to make a closing remark, we have a very brief 5 minutes left for your closing remarks before we finalize this discussion. So Doreen, if you would like to give us your closing remark for today.
Yeah, I think the point that I would make is that partnerships here are key. And we've talked about breaking down the sectoral approach. I'm thinking about Harry's question about M&E. There's nothing worse than having a bunch of conservation biologists trying to measure water quality if they haven't been trained. Opportunity here to expand those partnerships, but also for the TO, right? These are ministries environment. I think get these ministers of ministries and giving them the evidence of what those co-benefits are so they can influence these national budget streams as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Doreen. Ellison, have you got a closing nugget for us?
Just to thank you. And again, I guess a request for everybody is to try to speak the language of the economists and the financial colleagues that you have. So everybody should make a new friend who is not a conservationist or doesn't believe on everything that you believe in, and try to engage him, whether it's in this TFCA network or just in your day-to-day job. I think that is something that we all need to do so that we move beyond just to convert it to, the people who are making the decisions, and whether we like it or not, it's being pushed down. So if we can all kind of do a bit more on that and engage and convince, I think, we make a bit of progress. So thank you again.
Thanks, Ellison. And I'm a great proponent of your comments. I think language is key, and often we communicate our different value concepts in set terminology, and conservationists have their terminology and the finance sector have theirs. So make a friend and bridge the gap and learn to speak each other's language. Tebogo, I'm going to hand over to you for a closing remark.
Thank you, Candice. Thank you, colleagues and friends. Listen, from the EU side, the way we conduct our business is normally through other institutions. Even when you come to a country, these are bilateral arrangements with a country, or other arrangements with international organizations. I can only speak to the colleagues who are here to encourage the organizations that you work through to be a bit more, I don't know, outgoing, a bit more, have approachable and be able to respond as quickly as possible when we, putting our plans together, or when we working together. I'm just trying to say that sometimes there's a lot of delays, which in the end, the programs such as the TFCAs, they lose opportunities because there have been delays in institutional arrangements that are not, that could have been avoided if everyone had the same interest in protecting biodiversity, in having, making sure that, knowing why we are working in TFCAs. We have those frameworks. As I said, the EU Green Deal is coming, and we will have roots and other unions to be able to work together to support work in transfrontier conservation areas across the globe. I'll stop this far. If colleagues want to reach out to me, I'm sure there's an email somewhere that anybody can drop me a line. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much to our panelists, and we have reached the end of our hour. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And as Tebogo mentioned, we are all an email away, and we're in this together. So let's share our respective knowledge, our resources, and be able to come up with innovative solutions. Clara, I'm going to hand over to you to close us off.
Thank you very much, Candice, and thank you to all of the experts today. It was really a wonderful discussion, and I must say, Alison, I think we were ahead of your suggestion, and we brought in Candice, and so we have made a new friend over the last 2 weeks. And even though she comes a bit from the conservation sector, she knows a lot more about finances and sustainable funding than we do. So I'm so glad that your suggestion was one that we already were thinking about going on to. So welcome, Candice, to also this new network for you of the SADC TFCAs. And thank you for everybody that engaged on the chat. It is always interesting to see how things happen sometimes in written format and not verbally, but in respect also of the times and the fact that we want to share opinions and expertise as much as we can within the time constraint of this event. But also, if you want to engage, of course, the panelists forward, you're welcome to, and we can set up other discussions and other more pointed talks to the issues that were raised. Without taking any more of your time, thank you everybody, and I just would like to point you into the direction of our second to last week, next week, week 9, in which we're going to talk about legal frameworks for transboundary natural resource management. So we're going to look at the Convention of Migratory Species, which was actually the very first convention that talked about inter-country collaboration and cooperation for the management of wildlife and wildlife species. We're going to look at the Great Virunga and how transboundary natural resource management stemmed from and led to a peace-building process. And we're going to look at what are the challenges in projects, the independent projects that want to work in transboundary settings. And then on Thursday, there's been a little change to the topic of discussion. We are going to talk about a bit what we talked about today, about helping to connect the dots between what we need for sustainable development in Southern Africa, and what are the international mandates given by conventions and legal frameworks. So thank you everybody for today. I look forward to seeing you all next week, Tuesday and Thursday again. Have a good day forward. Thank you. As you go, please wave bye-bye to one another.
Bye.
And let's join hands from a distance. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank
Keep
you.
well. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Bye, patients.